What's up, y'all? It is the first big race of the season of 2025. We're at BWR Arizona. The race is 103 miles, about 7,500 feet of climbing. 58% of that is unroad or off-road. I am riding the Lauf Segla with the suspension fork. Tire choice was a little tricky, but we're going to get there in a second. There were a ton of hitters that showed up for this race. You got Keegan, you got Russell Finsterwald, Lance Hayden, Andrew Lespons, John Borstelman, Rob Britton, a couple dudes from Europe. It was stacked. Now, I kind of find myself on the front. There's 4 or 5 guys that have got a little bit of a gap off of the main group. We're still on the first few miles of this initial climb at the beginning of this race. And there is one rider to note, John Borstelman, who is up the road. He's a really strong rider, and I was thinking, wow, we're going to give him this big of a leash, but it totally makes sense to get a gap before the climb really starts to pick up, because it's pretty gradual. There's a downhill, and then it kicks up for a really long time after that, and that's where it's going to be really hard. So if Borstelman and these 3 or 4 other guys that are with him can get a buffer before the climb gets really hard, then we'll just catch them, and they won't have to actually go as hard as we will on the climbing portion. However, I don't think that's what Borstelman's strategy was here, because he's pretty strong. I think Borstelman wanted to get a buffer for the trail section that came after that, because we go into the longest climb straight into the most technical part of the course. Borstelman is not quite known for his technical riding ability off-road, if you know what I mean. And being a aware dude, he knows that this is a weakness of his. So if he can get as much of a buffer before we hit that technical trail section, then maybe that will help him to be able to stay with the leaders a bit longer. Not a bad strategy. All right, let's talk tires. This course has a ton of mountain bike trails. In 2024, I noticed that a lot of the top names at the race were running suspension forks and basically as wide of tires that would allow in their bike. So knowing that, I was like, okay, well, mountain bike tires might be the easy decision. However, BWR changed up the course in a pretty dramatic way. We now do the hardest loop of the course first instead of last, which means we basically climb for the first 15 miles of the race, and most of that is on pavement, meaning mountain bike tires will be significantly slower. So my original thinking was I'd run the Pathfinder 42s, have a bit of an advantage for those first 15 miles on the paved climb, and then maybe I wouldn't have the optimal tire for a lot of the course after that, but maybe I could hold my own. At least I'd be with the leaders at that point. I had kind of just assumed if I ran mountain bike tires, there was no chance I'd be able to stay with the leaders on that initial climb. But, however, after pre-riding most of the course with Chase throughout that week, he convinced me otherwise, and I ended up sticking with the Continental Race King 2.2s because they were the better tire for the majority of the course, and I was hoping that maybe the pace wouldn't be as hot as I was anticipating it on that first climb. And that first climb was hard, but it wasn't quite as hard as I had anticipated. I was able to get pretty good position, and I stayed near the front for the majority of the climb, and I even went into the final parts of the climb basically with the leaders, but started to fade on the last few little kickers before we hit the first descent. Meanwhile, my teammate, who's not known for his climbing abilities necessarily, was passing Keegan and crested over the top of the climb in the top 5. Kudos to him. That's awesome. I made a few big mistakes right near the top of the climb. I was on a really good wheel. I was following Lance Haydat, and I know this rider to be a rider who can stick that front group. He got second in this race and was the only rider to stick with Keegan last year. He's a good wheel to be on. And just as we were cresting the last steep pitch of the climb, I let two guys pass me, which was a huge mistake because they immediately proceeded to let Lance ride away from them, and I had to wait to get around them. The last 6 miles of the climb was the hardest bit, and it took about 24 minutes, and I had a normalized power of 356 watts, which is 0.98 intensity factor given my FTP, and my heart rate tapped out at 192 beats per minute. It was quite hard. Me and Chase Wark debuted lunchbox racing, and actually we were one of the only few teams whose kits actually showed up on time for the first race of the season, although they did show up literally the day before. But we did get a lot of compliments on the new kits, and I do think they turned out pretty rad. At the bottom of the climb, I could just see that beautiful red and gray checkered kit of my teammate ahead of me, who's also not known for his descending skills apparently, because I caught him on the downhill. But me and him proceeded to work together for the next about 90 minutes to try to get back up to that lead group. From what we were hearing on the sidelines, we were about 7th, maybe 8th place, and we were only about 30 seconds from the leaders for a long time. But by the time we got to McDowell, which was about halfway through the race, they had already put another minute into us, and it wasn't looking like we were going to catch them. On most of the single track sections, Chase would let me pass him and lead those sections because he knew that I had a little bit more off-road skills than he did. And so overall, our speed and our pace would be a little higher if I led on those sections, which then meant I wasn't afraid to let him lead a little more on the paved sections, knowing how much more aero he is than I am. As we were coming up on our bottles, I gave Chase a little bit of a gap because his wonderful wife Abigail, who happens to be 35 weeks pregnant at the time of the race, was feeding both of us, and so I wanted there to be a gap so that we could both get our bottles and it wouldn't be too stressful for her. And here is my nutrition plan. My race was 100% fueled by GOODLIFE nutrition. I started with two 26-ounce bottles with 125 grams of the carbs mix in each bottle. At mile 24, I got another 26-ounce bottle with 125 grams. At mile 47, I got a 1 liter bottle with 150 grams of carbs. And at mile 82, I got one last 26-ounce bottle with 125 grams of carbs. That's 650 carbs, which is about 110 per hour. And if you want to save 20% on your next GOODLIFE nutrition order, go to fuelmygoodlife.com and at checkout use code RADDADGOODLIFE. Now my back had started to hurt quite early in this race, and eventually I had to just tell Chase to go on without me once we were in the middle of those McDowell trails, because I just could not handle the pace that he was setting with the back pain that I was also experiencing. He was reluctant at first because it's usually better for you to stay together and work together in a long race like this, but like I said, I was going too slow, and eventually he does ride away from me. Me and Chase were together for about 29 miles. My normalized power was 272 or 0.75 intensity factor. Average heart rate was 175, and this should have been a typical race pace that I could have held for the entire race. I have averaged over 0.75 intensity factor in multiple races in the past, and I know that this is a pace that I am capable of handling for the duration of a long race like this. Not long after I lose sight of Chase, I get caught by 3 riders, one of which is Kyle Trudeau, who is leading the group. And I let him come right on by. I'm not going to try to get in his way. So I slot in second place behind Kyle, and I follow his wheel for maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and then he pulls over and flicks me through.
Good. Yeah, I don't have to pull.
Well then fucking do it so somebody can come around you, dog.
But I just said, look, I'm not pulling, you can just keep pulling. And he got pretty mad, and I guess rightly so. He doesn't want to do all the work, but I also don't quite understand why he got mad, because he's a mountain biker and we're on mountain bike trails. You don't get much of a draft on mountain bike trails anyways. I think he knows this, so I don't know why he would want us to pull, because it's not much advantage to him getting, he's not getting much of a draft, and he's the best mountain biker in the group, so he's probably going to lead faster than any of us. And when you consider the fact that he crashed on that early section, and now he's probably the strongest rider in this group, the only reason he's not with the leaders is because he crashed, so he's probably stronger than me and the 2 college-aged kids that are on my wheel. So him flicking us through was only going to be to his detriment, because we're only going to pull slower than him. So if his goal was to catch more riders and go as fast as he could, us leading the pace through the single track section doesn't make much sense. And this isn't the first run-in I've had with Kyle Trudeau. He got mad at me for not pulling through on a steep climb at Big Sugar last year, which he yelled at me then, he yelled at me this time. It probably won't be the last time that I get yelled at by that guy. But props to him because he drops me shortly after that, and he proceeds to rail it all the way to the finish and finishes 7th place. So kudos to him, that's a pretty solid ride. After this group left me, I half expected a dozen more riders to just blow right past me because I really had to pump the brakes because of this back pain. Now I know I'm starting to sound like a little girl pansy complaining about this back, but it was painful. So I was surprised when I neither caught anybody and nobody caught me for the remainder of the race. I stayed right where I was. Didn't see anybody ahead of me, didn't see anybody behind me for the entire second half of the race, which I was pretty pleased about given the state in which I was in. Now, just to let you know how bad the back pain was, there was about a 30-minute period in the McDowell trails where I only averaged 167 watts, and my average heart rate was only 150 beats per minute. And I lost a ton of time during that 30 minutes not being able to put power into the pedals. But after about 30 minutes, started to feel a little bit better. I was able to pick the pace back up to about 240 watts all the way to the end of the race, and was able to get my average heart rate back up to about 170, which is still below my typical race pace, but not too far off from it. Altogether, the race took 5 hours and 43 minutes, which was about 20 minutes slower than Keegan. It was a 305 TSS, 265 normalized power, 0.73 intensity factor, and 169 average heart rate. And all of this was good enough for 11th place, which is just a slight improvement upon last year's 13th place, in which I crashed. Didn't crash this year, so that's also a thumbs up. But I'm optimistic for better results to come throughout the remainder of the year. That's all I've got for this video. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.